get going here.
Okay. And you want me to do the introduction?
Yep. It'll just be a moment here.
And it's Kiefler, right?
Yep.
Okay. My memory is not what it was.
All right. We're ready to go.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our snack program. We have a really great program set today. Samantha Kiefler, who is the superintendent at Havenwoods State Natural Area, will be with us. Samantha has more than 10 years of experience in the natural resources field. She currently serves as the Natural Resources Property Supervisor of the Milwaukee Work Unit within the Wisconsin State Park System. This means she oversees Havenwoods State Forest, Lakeshore State Park, and the Hank Aaron State Trail. Prior to this appointment, she was the park manager of the McKenzie Center, following years in law enforcement for the DNR's Parks and Recreation Management and Bureau of Law Enforcement. She holds a master's degree in natural resources leadership and administration from UW-Stevens Point, and received her undergraduate in wildlife conservation and management from Missouri State University. She also obtained her Department of Justice Peace Officer certification from the DNR Law Enforcement Academy. Samantha's originally from West Central Illinois and now lives in Washington County with her daughter, who I met when we talked on Zoom a few weeks ago. She enjoys spending time recreating in Wisconsin's outdoors. What a surprise. And refurbishing furniture and traveling. So Samantha, we're really happy to have you here to tell us about Havenwoods then and now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the invite. Havenwood State Forest it certainly is a gem within the city of Milwaukee that's not very well known. And we're kind of in a revisioning process for the forest. So this couldn't have come at a more perfect time. We are trying to get the word out on the forest and let more people know we're here and what we have to offer the community. So I have a presentation put together. I haven't actually run through this presentation in over a year, so hopefully everything goes well. With COVID, we've not been doing any public presentations. I apologize in advance for anything that may be awkward and weird. But we'll get going here. Just to start again with just a brief introduction, my name is Samantha. I'm the superintendent of Havenwood State Forest in the Milwaukee Parks Work Unit within the Department of Natural Resources, Wisconsin State Park System. I oversee Havenwood State Forest, Lakeshore State Park, and the Hank Aaron State Trail, all within the city of Milwaukee. So today I'm going to talk specifically on Havenwoods. Today, Havenwood State Forest is a 237-acre tract on the far northwest side of Milwaukee within the Havenwoods neighborhood community. It's at 6141 North Hopkins Street at the intersection of Sherman Boulevard and Douglas Avenue, so just off of 43rd and Silver Spring. The property is owned and managed by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources under the Bureau of Parks and Recreation Management and the Wisconsin State Park System. Havenwood State Forest is the state's only urban state forest. As I mentioned, it includes 237 acres of wetland, grassland, and woodland habitat within the city of Milwaukee. There's opportunities to hike, run, bike, and watch wildlife on over 6 miles of trails. Lots of opportunities to explore. There's a nature center, ponds, 120-foot bridge that spans over Lincoln Creek, a tributary to the Milwaukee River, which of course feeds into Lake Michigan. So we are within the Milwaukee Milwaukee estuary. And we've got benches stationed throughout the forest. So if you're just looking for a place to sit and relax outdoors, we are certainly the place for that. So the forest is open 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Daily, year round. The nature center hours do vary by season. Staffing levels is mostly the reasons for that. And our hours can be found on our DNR's website, which is just dnr.wi.gov. A vehicle admission sticker or the state a vehicle admission sticker or the state trail pass are not required to recreate at this property, as with other state park system properties. This property is free to access and recreate on. There are accessible restrooms and changing tables located within the Nature Center when the center is open. Drinking fountains are available in the Nature Center as well when the center is open, and just south of the trailhead kiosk in season. It is important to know, though, that currently the Nature Center and drinking water fountains are closed due to COVID-19. We don't yet have a foreseeable reopening date. We're hopeful that that may be soon, but like I said, we don't have a date on hand yet. So there are not currently restrooms or drinking water available at the site at this time. There are more than 6 miles of hiking trails to explore, and additional mileage through the Moan Pass throughout the property is available. There are about 2 miles of limestone trails and asphalt road open to bicycling. These trails are shared with hikers, so please use trail etiquette when riding. Cross-country skiers and snowshoers are welcome in the winter on the trails. The trails are not groomed, but the property is mostly flat in terrain, so it provides a good place for beginners to get out and try their hand at snowshoeing or skiing, cross-country skiing, that is. There are picnic tables in the urban arboretum and next to the parking lot for visitors to use. However, there are no fires or grills permitted on property. We are within the city, so we do restrict that. The property does have a carry in, carry out policy that visitors should be aware of, meaning there are no receptacles for refuge on property, and anything that's brought in must be carried out with you. So a bit more on the Nature Center. There are seasonal displays, drop-in activities, and live wildlife exhibits within the center. Available for the visitors to interact with. Visitors can also pick up species list, geocaching adventure booklets, Nature Explorer booklets, and other publications. And we also offer some loaner equipment, such as binoculars and field guides, GPS units, snowshoes, all for use within the forest by our forest visitors. There's no cost for the loaning program. You just stop in and pick up what equipment you may need to hit the field. The property also offers affordable day field trip opportunities for organized groups that are seeking experience, are seeking focused experience, studying natural resources and outdoor skills. Classes are matched the Wisconsin education standards to aid in teacher planning, which is very helpful. And more information on what courses we do offer and at what rates is available on our website. Here at Havenwoods, we also offer many family-oriented events and educational programs throughout the year. They are canceled or postponed currently due to COVID-19, but we hope to have some more events planned and on the calendar for this coming year. That our events can be found on our website again when they are available. So that's kind of the current, what we are currently, but I did want to talk a bit on our history. And could I just ask for a reminder on what time frame I had, just so I can keep an eye on the time?
It's about 12:10 right now. So if you had about 10 more minutes and then took some questions, that would be perfect.
Okay, great. All right. So, so onto the history. Before all that is here now, there was just the land. So before written history, before really anything that we know now, just the land. So after the glaciers receded and time passed, this land that was to become Havenwoods was likely wet and probably forested. It was wilderness. We don't know much about the time in history, but if you're familiar with our location, it's hard to imagine it being a wilderness with all the development of modern society surrounding us. And then there were the people. at least there were transient people. Most native people centered their villages around water, and while this land was wet, there's no indication that there was ever navigable. So it's unlikely that people resided on this land. The only traces of people on the land that have been found and recorded are chert flakes, indicating that someone stopped at some time to sharpen some tools a time or two. We do have geocaches throughout the property, and there is a geocache with a sample of chert. So if you're interested in geocaching, check that out. And as time passed, over came the Europeans. There's more record of this time period, of course. The first documentation of this land was by William Burt and his surveying crew. They walked this land in May of 1836 and through what was wilderness, traipsing back and forth, marking trees, installing stakes, taking measurements, taking notes, and drafting maps. They developed the land survey. As Bert's crew finished each township, they wrote a summary, mainly to capture the suitability of the land for farming. The entry for this land, what was to become Havenwoods within the township of Granville, is generally rolling or in the soil mostly loam. There are many small tracks on the highest grounds of granite boulders, and the streams are generally a gentle current with narrow bottoms on each side. Most of the early settlers did come here to farm. The land was that was to become Havenwoods was owned by the Zitke family, the Harkboths, and the Pipcorn families, who all immigrated from Germany. So if you see on this plat map here, I'm not sure how big that appears for you, but you can see each one of their plots there with the major landowner in this area that became Havenwoods being the Zitke family. The land was cleared and farmed with horses and plows. Besides to meet their own needs for food, the Zutke family, we do know that they took produce into Milwaukee to sell. And at the time, it was over a 6-mile journey for them to do so. Then came in the railways and the end of the family farm chapter of this property at the turn of the century. Havenwoods is bordered on the west and north by rail tracks that remain active to this day. The west diagonal tracks were laid in 1853, and the northern tracks running east to west were laid in 1910. At the turn of the century, Milwaukee County had the need for a new prison facility. The House of Corrections in Wind Lake was being condemned, so Milwaukee County started buying up farmland from the property owners on the northwest edge of the city for a new modern House of Corrections, with the purpose of the House of Corrections being safekeeping, reformation, and employment. The complex was big. It was a big complex of buildings, and these buildings shown in this image here were actually located just where we are here today at the Nature Center and the parking lot. Hard to imagine there was that much development here, but it gets bigger. The buildings were comprised of a chair factory, a furniture chair factory, modern and complete administrative buildings, a mess hall with a kitchen, a bakery, laundry, cell houses, dormitories, hospital, school quarters, and it was all surrounded by a courtyard with a recreation court. And there were inspectors' dwellings and farm buildings that had a herd of 70 or so Holstein cattle and also hogs and poultry. Here are just some images of the House of Corrections being developed. Just massive buildings. This actually round image in the center was a shower room. And this is the front side of the administration building. Escapees were fairly common 100 years ago. So we think the purpose of these uniforms like you see here was to have the prisoners to be more identifiable and easier for staff to catch upon their escape. But this is an example of the uniforms that would have been worn at this House of Corrections. And then this is a photo of the cell blocks that were here. This is a image of the House of Corrections staff. And funny enough, these trees that are behind are still on property today. William Mosen was a superintendent of the House of Corrections. The prisoners called the House of Correction the Momsen Hotel. The new prison was self-sustaining. Inmates were employed on a 340-acre farm and a furniture factory, and the furniture factory was called the Granville Furniture Company. If you remember from previous slides, the property was located within the township of Granville. Here's an image of what you might have been able to buy from the furniture factory: a chair at $3.50 and a table at $10. And here's an aerial of the ground that was to become Havenwoods, is to become Havenwoods. This is a 1937 aerial showing the House of Correction and the working prison. Education has been a component of this property for over a century. It is a component of our current mission, but it was also a component of the inmates' time here. The county provided activities to help educate the prisoners. One of them, opportunities to educate, was a prison newspaper. It was developed by the inmates for the inmates, and it had news stories, sports stories. Baseball was a huge pastime and distraction for the prisoners, which is another link to modern times. Milwaukee County currently has Shinneker Park just to the north of us, which is baseball diamonds. This building here, stunning, massive. Hard to believe it was right here where the Nature Center is today. And the flagpole. The flagpole is actually another geocache opportunity on property for discovery. So there's remnants there to be discovered by current property visitors. So the highest inmate population of this prison was around 2,000 during Prohibition. By 1940, it was in the hundreds for several reasons. Women were no longer housed at the prison. Federal prisoners were sent to federal prison. And then a sudden change in world events changed the future of this property again. This was 1941 and the bombing of Pearl Harbor. With that bombing of Pearl Harbor, by December 9th, 2 days later, 620 German aliens had been taken into custody by the US government. We hear about Japanese American and Italian Americans, but not very often do we hear about the German Americans who were also taken from their homes and sent into internment camps. So later that month in December, the county contracted with the federal government to lease space for internment of German Americans here on what was to become the Havenwoods property. The U.S. feared that they were enemy sympathizers, and the federal FBI agents took into custody Milwaukee residents, like this man pictured here, Joseph Grease, and placed them into internments at the House of Correction, or the prison, and other sites around the city. As World War II was beginning to wind down, there was need for more space for court-martialed soldiers, and so the Army seized the prison from the county and took over operations, forming the U.S. Army Disciplinary Barracks. The Army construction crew began working on the property soon after the Army took over in the spring of 1945, and they put up additional buildings, 9 cement one-story buildings. 4 of the new buildings were used as barracks, and the others were set up as mess hall, officers' quarters, training buildings, post-exchange supply buildings. With the plan was set for inmate capacity of 1,500. And for sake of time, we'll click through some of these images here. So post-war, the property began to resemble something that we're familiar with today. Soldiers were returning home, they needed housing. Many had left behind significant others who also needed housing. So the homes of the Bering Land community presently at the eastern boundary of the forest on Hopkins, Douglas, Sherman, and Florist, were constructed for this purpose. There was also a trailer park on the south corner of the property for veterans and their families. This is the south corner on that right-hand image. That would be what was to become Silver Spring and Sherman there. Let's see. The U.S. Army adjusted their operations in 1950 and 1970 and utilized the property as an Army Reserve training facility. So you see all the infrastructure here. I mean, if you're familiar with this neighborhood at all, it really becomes recognizable here. With the rail track, the water tower remains, as well as the Berryland community there. Let's see. The Cold War era. Here were some of the target cities. During this time, world events escalated into what became known as the Cold War. America's political leaders were unnerved by the USSR, China, and their allies, and they began to act. The goal was to protect the major cities from long-range Soviet bombers by encircling the cities with guided missile installations. Unlike later missile systems that would be developed throughout the Cold War, Nike Ajax had an extremely limited range of only 25 miles radius. The missiles had to be placed in close proximity to whatever city it was to protect. It was typical to install multiple Nike missile sites in a large ring around a defense area, providing a solid line of defense no matter where an attack occurred. It was decided that a total of 8 missile batteries were to line the outskirts of Milwaukee, America's 10th largest urban area at the time. This map shows the Nike sites of Milwaukee, with Havenwoods being one of those. Nike installations were basically built from the same blueprint with minor adjustments for topography. There were 2 components of each Nike site. This is Havenwoods Nike site, the launch area and the radar area. Havenwoods was the site of a launch area. This site, remnants of this site remain. This is an aerial view of that, and also shows the radar location, which was on the other side of the railroad tracks on the southwest side of the property, which, remember, at this time was also U.S. Army land. And remains U.S. Army land now. The Nike missile site was from 1956 to 63. The missiles were stored underground here and could be conveyed to the surface to be fired 25 miles in any direction. But soon after they were installed, they were obsolete. 3 of the Milwaukee Nike sites were upgraded to the Hercules missiles, and the rest were abandoned. And this is when we fell into what we call the wild years. We were all but abandoned. We don't know much about this time. The Army Reserve was here, but we're not sure really what they were using the site for. It was basically abandoned. They had declared 140 acres surplus in 1967 and the remainder in 1969. Though this land did continue to play an important role in the history of Milwaukee. Command post during the Milwaukee riots of 67. Milwaukee Tenant Union of 69. The abandoned buildings of the Army were an attractive nuisance. There are many stories of teens playing in the cell blocks, going through the underground tunnels, setting fires, parties. And in 1974, actually, the last of the buildings was razed. The Army declared the land surplus first in 67 and more in 69, and developers and city planners turned their sights on this large tract of land. The tract held by the Army was a large tract of land in the city, and everybody wanted it. And for a time, many groups had it. There's post office, an incinerator site, senior housing, MATC campus, and a county landfill, actually. In 1975, the Friends of Havenwoods developed. There were a small group of citizens who said that we didn't need more development on the north side of the city and we needed green space. They became the Friends of Havenwoods in 1975, and this is the Friends of Havenwoods Incorporated, who yet support the forest to this very day. It's a dedicated group of folks who got some politicians on their side and just wouldn't give up. And by 76, they had secured some of the land from the city for a natural, with the city for a natural area, and dedicated a bridge across Lincoln Creek in honor of the bicentennial. By 77, the Friends had helped to pull together 103 acres plus another 43 acres, and they were bargaining for more. The city of Milwaukee was planting native trees, and in 75, the land was named Havenwoods. At some point, dreams may have gotten too big, and the city realized they were just not in the position to clean up and care for this large abused tract of land. So the city contacted the National Park Service in 74 to find a solution. The National Park Service had a federal lands to parks program, whereby excess federal lands could become public recreation and educational lands. The National Park Service visited around 1975, and here are some of the only photos we have from that time period. In 1978, the city of Milwaukee was ready to transfer the land to the National Park Service and into the Federal Lands for Parks program. And ready to receive the land is the state of Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The DNR accepted the deed and then remains deeded to the National Park Service Federal Lands of Parks program to this very day. Over the next few years, staff were hired, volunteers gathered, and the Friends gained support. People came to pick up litter, patrol the site, plant trees, put up nature signs, and build trails. They really were greening this once-raised site. The property was scarred, but it was beginning to heal. This is a 1985 aerial. Not much in the way of green vegetation. And with healing and healing, a true battle between the past and the present, scars and healing. It's present on the landscape today, but we've achieved a status of nature. It's not quite wilderness as it was before, but certainly a green space within the city. This is a fairly good representation of what an aerial might look like today. Here's some images of the Nature Center. And our current bridge over Lincoln Creek, 120-foot span over Lincoln Creek. Okay, so I kind of rushed through it a little bit, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take any.
Well, thank you, Samantha. And you know, if you shut your screen down, then we'll just go to gallery view and people can ask you questions. How's
Okay.
that?
There we go.
It's like Chris has one.
No, I was
Oh,
just
no.
I was looking to see what was in the chat.
I
Right.
have a question, Samantha.
Sure.
Two things, maybe three. Was there a lot of contamination that had to be cleaned up?
There was, yes. Not from, it was more from the demolition and in the years of abandonment than from the actual infrastructure that was here for the 80 years or so with the House of Corrections and the Army base. And the landfill that came. It was a 16-acre landfill that was put in the 70s. So there was a lot of issues with that, and it's since been remediated. And we still do currently monitor the groundwater on both sides, on the Army side of the property and on our side of the property.
I haven't visited there yet. I plan to, but of all those buildings that were on that site, none of those remain.
Nope, there's not a single building left. And actually most of them were burned. So when the Army took over from the House of Corrections, some facilities were taken down and they were bulldozed on site into their basements or mounded and left. And then in the 70s, when the property was really in an abandoned state, most things were burned. And so when the National Park Service came in, things were just, the remaining was just demolished and pushed. And so there's a lot of debris yet remaining on the land. in as far as like rebar and concrete and that sort of material still on site. Mhm. Yeah.
So Samantha, if somebody were going to take a trip out to Havenwoods today or next week, what would they see in terms of nature, in terms of what's going on out on the trails and the land?
Yeah. So today, we are 237 acres of nature. So there's actually only one building on property. It's our nature center, and one parking lot. Everything else is naturalized. We have central hardwood forest habitat, tall grass prairie habitat, and wetland in the way of ponds and Intermittent Creek and Lincoln Creek. Lincoln Creek actually traverses from the north to the very southern tip of the property, runs the entire length of the property. So if you were to visit today, you'd find 6 miles of naturalized trails, 2 miles of that being limestone and the rest being natural surface, grass, wood chip surface. But a natural setting is what you would find here today.
Are there any attacking red-winged blackbirds?
There are a lot of those. We keep them here. And starlings. Oh, the starlings are terrible. Yes. So we have a decent size white-tailed deer population. We estimate the population between 12 and 20, which is probably our carrying capacity, maybe a bit over carrying capacity. And we have a few resident coyotes who stay here year-round. We have a rare species of snake, a Butler's Gartner snake, and we actually have the only pocket population in the state of Wisconsin here, and it's extremely dense population. They are everywhere.
What are those? What is that?
Butler Gartner snake.
Oh.
There's a smaller, garter snake, but they're a rare species, and if you're here, you'll probably come across one. We also have milk snakes are also very common on property. That's probably our reptiles.
I think the Butler snake has been taken off the endangered species list now. No?
Yep, now it's considered rare rather than endangered. Yeah.
Yeah, my company had a 10-year hiatus on a piece of land out west in Waukesha County because they found one Butler garter snake.
Yes, I believe it. Yep. But we also have turkeys, and we have the migratory birds. We're a good stopping over point with the ponds that we do have for migration. Sandhill cranes frequent us. We have an eagle hanging in the area. And who else is out there? The Cooper's hawk nest. They're pretty, they make themselves known, the Cooper's hawks. Yeah.
Is it pretty easy to come out there and run laps?
Oh, yeah.
Run the path. It's a pretty nice loop, or?
Yeah. And we actually did with Project with the Friends of Havenwoods, we actually applied for a Knowles Nelson Stewardship Grant to be able to loop our trails. So our trails before were kind of segments, and our map indicated that. And so what we have been working on is still a work in progress. It'll take us a few more years to really get it all figured out, but we've actually marked the trails in loops, and then adjusted our map to show mileage in loops rather than in segments. But we do still have a segment map available if people are interested in putting segments together rather than our loops.
Okay.
But it is mostly flat. There is a little bit of gentle incline, but nothing in way of hill, anything that would be called a hill.
Did you say there was a requirement for a permit or to get in or not?
There's not, no. So free admission, no vehicle, state park sticker required, and also no trail pass. If you were to bike the trails, you do not need a state trail pass to do so.
Good.
Yeah.
So I remember last time I was out there, there was really a huge area of like garden space. Is that
Yes.
the Friends group or?
Yes, no. It is a partnership with the Milwaukee County UW Extension Office. So we have community rental garden plots available here, and it is operated by the extension. We provide the land and the water and maintain outside of the fence. Everything to do with the garden inside that fence is handled by the extension. But it's at, I want to say, just over $40 for a plot. And I believe they're 20 by 20 plots for the year. And so those are available to the community. And then we also have just some landscaping gardens, like a butterfly garden, a rain garden, pollinator gardens, and an area that's called the Naturalist Backyard. And all these areas have been neglected for a number of years. And we are working through grants and with landscape designers and our DNR ecologists to redevelop those gardens into good habitat for the species we wish to support with them. So pollinator, we actually have a pollinator garden going in with a grant from the Wisconsin Pollinator Conservation Fund on Monday. So we're very excited about that. And then we have a designer coming in to help us connect that pollinator garden into what is our naturalist backyard with another grant coming up. So
Just from a regulatory standpoint, who makes these decisions? Is this made out of Madison, out of here, or where do you who's running the show for this park? In other words,
what sorts of decisions?
well, like you said, you're making decisions on gardens and attractions.
That's me.
Pardon?
That would be me. I'm the superintendent of the site.
So you have authority over the whole site.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I operate within our master plan, which is dated. It was it was put together in 1981, but my decisions are guided by our master plan and the Bureau of Parks and Recreation.
Ah.
I have two questions.
Sure.
Hi, Samantha.
Hi.
Thanks for the presentation.
Absolutely.
First is what government entity is responsible for patrolling the park and safety?
Yep. So the Department of Natural Resources, we have a Bureau of Law Enforcement who are the Wisconsin Conservation Wardens. They are our primary law enforcement entity for this property at this time. 5 years ago, it would have been Bureau of Parks and Recreation law enforcement rangers, but we no longer have rangers in the Department of Natural Resources. So it all falls to the conservation wardens. However, I maintain a working relationship with Milwaukee PD District 4, and they also patrol the property.
And can you talk more about the Friends? Like how many are there, and how are they organized? And
Sure. So the Friends of Havenwoods have been incorporated since '75. Their membership is pretty on the smaller side. There's about 100 to 150. They are on a membership drive. They're working to become more robust, diverse and inclusive. Their board, I believe they hold a board of 12, maybe 13. And most of those members have been with the organization since the formation. So they took a liking to the property and they've stayed. So the Friends, they support the property's missions from habitat, natural resources, habitat improvements to stewardship of the land, and definitely support our education program. And they hold stewardship days, Saturday work days, but they also come and support volunteer needs that we have. For example, they'll be here Monday with our planting of the pollinator garden to help with some volunteer time. But yeah, their board's about 13 and about 100, 150 in membership.
Are those snakes that you mentioned harmless?
They are very harmless. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Stop laughing at me.
They are very cute. No, they get to be about less than 2 feet in length, and maybe an inch and a half in diameter on the absolute massive side of things. They eat earthworms, to give you a perspective on the size of the food they eat. Yeah, they eat earthworms and insects and maybe very, very, very tiny pinky mice. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
How is your budget determined? Are you a subset of the DNR budget?
Yeah, oh yeah. So
And what is it annually?
tiny, not adequate. The operating budget for Havenwoods, which includes LTE staffing, and our supplies and utility, is $65,000. To just give a little bit more shock factor to that, I am the only full-time employee here. So all other staff at this location are funded out of that $65,000 on top of our utilities, on top of our property tax, on top of everything. So yeah, a very inadequate. But we are visioning for a future and really working to come up with some partnerships, and the Friends of Havenwoods are actually doing some lobbying for another full-time position to be placed here at Havenwoods, in the form of a natural resources educator. So they're working on that. So there's a lot of good things happening here. I received this position about 2 years ago, and that was really a turning point for this property. We were just not really gaining any speed for the future. We're really stagnant operations, and with the governor's appointment and the appointment of our DNR Secretary Preston Cole, who was a former city forester for the city of Milwaukee, there's been an increased focus on Havenwoods and our future, which is really great. So that came with me. And so we are working to really ramp up here and become more of a member of the community's nature centers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's about 1:45, so I think that it's probably a good time to wrap up. But I know, Samantha, we have your contact information, and you said you'd be glad to any further communication if that makes sense. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And hopefully everybody can get outside and enjoy some of this beautiful day as well. So
Well, thank you, Samantha. We really
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite again, and hopefully you all can find your ways out here and enjoy Havenwoods. We have a lot of spring ephemerals in bloom right now, and a lot of turkey activity, as well as the migratory birds coming back in. So it's really a beautiful time out here if you've got the time.
Oh,
Thank
great.
you so much.
Yeah.